Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks. I thank all of you for attending. It was a very sizable crowd, so I'm very pleased to see this as well. As he said, I've come to talk about the Academy Awards and various aspects of the event, which has been around with us officially since technically since 1927, but officially since 1929 as well. Before we get into the discussion, when you think about the Academy Awards, what comes to mind to anyone? Oscar, movie stars. Glamour, clothes. Dress. All those things are certainly part of the Academy. When you think of the Academy Awards, what comes to mind to anyone?
The red carpet.
The red carpet. And some
Glitz and glamour.
glitz and glamour. All the
Stars.
movie stars. Okay, good. Okay. Economics probably, but that probably doesn't come to mind, but that is a factor as well. Speeches, okay, yes, definitely speeches. That's all those are part of it as well. The Academy Awards originally started in 1927, and officially became an annual event in Hollywood from 1929 onward to the present. The first Academy Awards was held at Louis B. Mayer's home, who was the president of MGM, Metro Goldwyn Mayer. It lasted 35 minutes. They handed out they handed out several awards, and after that they had dinner. That was the very first Academy Awards as well. And now we know, the better part of a century later, it is certainly, ballooned and transformed into a mega hundreds of millions of dollars event and industry as well. Examples of some films that have won the Academy Awards, starting off, the first film, All Quiet on Wings, was the very first film to win the Academy Awards in 1927, silent film Wings. All Quiet on the Western Front won the Academy Award in 1930-31. And 1941, for example, 1932, Grand Hotel, 1940, Rebecca.
I'm going to have to run in front of you. We got coordination problems here.
In 1940, Rebecca won the Academy Award for Best Picture, Alfred Hitchcock film. 1948, Hamlet. 1943, Casablanca. These are examples of films in the 1940s that won the Academy Award. In the 1950s, we had films like All the King's Men, Marty, which was an upset victory that year. Around the World in 80 Days in 1952, that was an upset victory in the sense that people thought that the favorite that year was considered, people who thought should have won that year was Singing in the Rain, Debbie Reynolds, Donald Connor movie, but and that's not unusual with the Academy Awards, and that's a section I'm going to talk about a little later.
You're going to have to hold it up right by your face.
Okay. Okay.
We can't hear you all back here.
Sure. Okay. Is that better? Okay. I'm sorry with the technology here. I said I don't know what you've heard so far, but in 1952, Around the World in 80. All Around the World in 80 Days won Best Picture. It was an upset victory because people had assumed that Singing in the Rain was the odds-on favorite to win Best Picture that particular year. In 1954, On the Waterfront, Marlon Brando was the Best Picture that year. Pretty much solidified him as a major Hollywood star by that time as well, the late Marlon Brando. In 1955, the following year, you had Marty, which won Best Picture, which was a major upset there as well. The late Ernest Borgnine won Best Actor that particular year. And you saw examples of the type of films in the 1950s that won Best Picture. And they were, pretty much primarily dealing with rebels and personal distress and people in some type of problems that dealt with human nature. By the 1960s, you begin to see the first film of the 1960s was The Apartment with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. which was not necessarily expected to win. And that was a very unusual year for the Academy Awards. The 1960s Academy Awards was kind of a mess from start to finish. There was a lot of things going behind the scenes. Some movies weren't not necessarily released in time. They had to be recertified. Some of the stars that year who were nominated were having health issues, such as Elizabeth Taylor and others. And it was just a very, very, it was a very unusual year for the Academy Awards in the sense that it was just, they pulled it off, but it was almost unpredictable that would act. There was some concern about how effective the Oscar race would be that particular year in 1960. But that year, The Apartment won Best Picture. The following year, West Side Story, which won that year. Natalie Wood was a star. Warren Beatty made him a major star. It won 11 Academy Awards, 10 Academy Awards, 10, which made it the most, one of the second highest, tied with several other films with the most Academy Award wins. Now, prior to that, 2 years earlier that year, Ben-Hur in 1959 won Best Picture, and Charlton Heston won Best Actor. That was at that point was the most Oscar-nominated film and won the most Academy Awards, 11, and that was at that time was unprecedented. But it won 11 Academy Awards, Ben-Hur in 1959. 2 years later, as I said, West Side Story won 10 Academy Awards. And that record has been tied from Ben-Hur in 2006 with Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. It won 11 Academy Awards as well. No film has won more than 11 Academy Awards, but those are the two films that have tied for the most Oscar wins as well. And West Side Story, with its 10 Academy Awards, is right behind it as well. Throughout the 60s, you see a number of films that begin to see it. Hollywood's beginning to look at the conscientiousness of America, but it's also interesting. They play it kind of safe. The mid-60s, up to the mid-60s. In 1962, you have Lawrence of Arabia, which wins Best Picture. 1963. You have, Tom Jones, which is a British film. Albert Finney was in there, the star. He didn't win the Academy Award that year. Sidney Poitier won that year. But it's definitely Tom Jones. You had that as well. And then in 64, you had My Fair Lady. And then the following year, you had The Sound of Music. These are the type of, it kind of showed you where Hollywood was at that particular time. And it was also an interesting time for Hollywood on many levels because the studio system was beginning to dismantle. It was, and it kind of showed you in the Oscar nominations and the type of films that were being nominated. And I think it showed you there was almost, by the late 60s in particular, the Academy Awards was a industry that was kind of in flux and probably arguably confusion. The type of films that were being nominated, were The Sound of Music in 1965. That won Best Picture. And then A Man for All Seasons. The late 60s, you get In the Heat of the Night in 1967. And 68, you get Oliver, which was a real upset there because people thought 2001: A Space Odyssey. Those are different. These are some of the films that some others looked to win, but Oliver, kind of came out of nowhere. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie, but it was kind of a surprise itself if you look at the movie that it did win. And that was kind of another unusual year for the Academy Awards as well. Cliff Robertson won for Charlie, and some people were questioning that as well. And it wasn't necessarily the strongest Best Actor race that year because the performances were. He was kind of. Some people think it was more of a supporting role, but he won Best Actor that year as well. So it was not what you call it really. Well, the most distinctive thing of that year was that two women won the Academy Award. That was Katharine Hepburn for The Lion and Winter and Barbara Streisand for Funny Girl. They both won, so they tied for Best Actress that year. But outside of that, it was not really a very memorable. And Ruth Gordon won for Rosemary's Baby as well.
I was going to just say, raise your voice a little bit.
Okay, Ruth Gordon won that year for Rosemary's Baby. In 1968, the distinctive part of that Oscar ceremony was that Katharine Hepburn and Barbara Streisand both won the Oscar. Barbara Streisand for Funny Girl, Katharine Hepburn for The Lion in Winter, and that was the most memorable part of the Oscars that particular year. The following year, 1969, you begin to see the Academy Awards become a little more edgier, so to speak. That year, Midnight Cowboy won Best Picture with Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman. Controversy when it won because at that time it was rated X at that time, and then they had to change it. Obviously, the Academy was not going to tolerate it. A film with that rating to be Best Picture, so they had to rate it R, to win. And certainly, by at that time, it shows you where we've come from. That was what it was considered. But and it was a controversial movie in the sense, Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight dealing with controversial subject matter, which had not necessarily hit America at that particular time, or at least not made it into the Academy Awards. But it kind of says something about the 1960s when we start off with The Apartment, which was a little, complex movie in 1960, and then we go all the way in the mid 60s. You kind of have bubblegum safe. Yeah, you tend to have bubblegum safe, more safe films like, The Sound of Music, My Fair Lady in the mid '60s, and by the late '60s you start having and Heave the Night, and then Midnight Cowboy. Now Oliver in 1968 kind of comes in there, and which is not falls to those categories, but you see the dynamics of what is taking place in the Academy Awards and kind of the diversity and probably membership at that time is becoming new members coming in with their personal taste, and as opposed to old members with their more established taste. In the '70s. You begin to see, starts off the decade with George C. Scott Patton. He also wins Best Actor, but he refuses to show up and he doesn't collect his Academy Award. And by the '70s, you're beginning to see people who are beginning to protest the Oscars and making these type of political statements, in some cases even the winners and nominees denouncing the award ceremonies as garish and controversial and elitist and whatever other terms they want to give it. And it's probably not unusual. You see that particularly in 1972, when there's a woman by the name of Sasheen Littlefeather, who Marlon Brando wins the Oscar for The Godfather, and she comes to the podium and says Mr. Brando says he refuses to accept the Academy Award because of the way that Native Americans are treated in the industry. Now, comes to find out she's not Native American. She's an she's an unemployed actress from the Screen Actors Guild. So in that sense, she's definitely not so she's not necessarily being totally truthful herself in a sense. And also, too, it makes you wonder if that's the best Mr. Brando can do. They probably need a better friend than Marlon Brando. so, in that sense. But that's when you begin to see a number of people beginning to be critical of the Academy Awards. And also the Academy Awards kind of finds this groove a little bit after that. In the previous year, 1971, The French Connection, with Gene Hackman won Best Picture that year as well in 1971. By '73, you have The Sting with Paul Newman and Robert Redford who wins. Then the following year, you have The Godfather Part 2. But The Godfather Part 2 comes in 1972, and it takes Hollywood out of its economic slump, because prior to that time, Hollywood did not know, people were not going to the movies. Television was giving it significant and severe competition. And they said, we have to find a formula what is going to bring people back to the movie theater. And then in 1972, The Godfather comes out, and that pretty much revives the movie industry and also revives the symbolicness of the Academy Awards in the sense that they know what type of movies they want to back and intend to nominate. And throughout the '70s, you begin to see that. By the mid '70s, you begin to see films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest win, and that was in 1975. '76 was also a surprising year for the Oscars in the sense that Rocky won Best Picture, and it was an upset. The Sylvester Stallone film, and Talia Shire. Many people thought that All the President's Men, Network, would probably, there were other Taxi Driver, they thought those were films that would probably even be stronger to win Best Picture. But Rocky surprised everyone and won Best Picture in 1976. The following year, 1977, we had Annie Hall, which was Diane Keaton, made her a star and put her on the map, Woody Allen film. And even to the day, since '97, that's the only romantic comedy film that's won Best Picture. In general, comedies have not been really acknowledged by the Oscars, by the Academy Awards. But that's the only film, or the last film since that time that's been this won Best Picture in 1977. That was a romantic comedy, and that was Annie Hall, 1977. But and then by '78, we had The Deer Hunter, which looked at the Vietnam War. Very popular film as well. I was real young at that time, and I was when I remember that when it came out in my hometown, there were lines around the corner wanting to see The Deer Hunter, and I remember that very, very well as well. And so it showed you the popularity of that. And there were definitely a lot of films that were looking at Vietnam, because we weren't far out of Vietnam at that time. We were talking about the fall of Saigon was 1975, so there was still those memories and those debates and images about Vietnam and passion that was still very, very prevalent. And you saw that with Coming Home with Jane Fonda and others, and John John Voight, as well, and he won Best Actor that year in 1978 for Coming Home as well. 1979, you begin to see Kramer versus Kramer. That started looking at the custody battles. Dustin Hoffman, Meryl Streep. He was another person who was kind of critical of the Academy. He gave a speech talking about how he refused. He beat this one, that one, and all the other ones as well. So, but the 70s, you begin to see, the diversity as well in films as well. When you come into the 1980s, you begin to see Ordinary People won that year for Best Picture, Mary Tyler Moore and Donald Sutherland. And that was considered not so much an upset, but there was a very strong year for movies, people argue, because you had Coal Miner's Daughter, which was, looked at the life of country music star Loretta Lynn, which was not filmed that far from here. I think somebody said it was filmed here in Eastern Tennessee. I wasn't here at the time, obviously, but they said it wasn't filmed that far from here, but it was considered a very strong contender for Best Movie. Raging Bull with Robert De Niro was also nominated that year. And you also had The Elephant Man, which was considered a movie, and also you had Tess as well. But Ordinary People won Best Picture that year, and that won Best Picture in 1980. Ordinary People. The following year, which was even more of a shocker to a lot of people, was Chariots of Fire in 1981, because people thought On Golden Pond or Reds or Taps would win Best Picture. So you saw that as well. Gandhi won in 82, and then Terms of Endearment, and then you can go on and on. But in the 80s, you saw much more Amadeus. You saw in the 80s, you begin to see a lot more. I won't say necessarily higher class films. When I say higher class, by higher class I mean more films that dealt with artists and Victorian era type subject matter begin to happen there as well, particularly by the mid 80s. Out of Africa won in 1985, and that was also a very, very interesting year for the Oscars as well. You had the films that were nominated that year for Best Picture in 1985. You had The Color Purple, you had Prince's Honor, you had Witness, and you had Out of Africa. Excuse me, and you had Out of Africa. Those are the films that were nominated, and Kiss of the Spider-Woman, and Kiss of the Spider-Woman. Those are the 5 films that were nominated for Best Picture that year. Out of Africa ended up winning Best Picture, but you also had The Color Purple, which came out at that time as well, which was a very controversial film, and it came out in many ways. Steven Spielberg directed the film, and many people in the African American community, or segments of the African American community, were very, very put off by what they felt are some of the depictions of the characters in the movie, and even a lot of even some conservative publications such as the National Review even denounced the film, saying that the film made black men look very, very, there was not a black man. They were quoting, there was not a black man in the film that had any redeeming qualities. And if you've seen the film, it was not a really good film at all. And as far as the men were not seen portrayed well at all. Whoopi Goldberg was the main star, the main actress in the film. She played the character Celie, and it was based on the Pulitzer Prize winning novel by Alice Walker, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1983, pardon me. And it was definitely a controversial film. It got nominated for 11 Academy Awards. Steven Spielberg himself did not get a nomination, which was controversial within itself. So the whole movie had controversy swirling all around it. And it ended up winning no Oscars. That prompted people to suspicion why did this film win no Oscars? And it was kind of bizarre in the sense that the NAACP, Los Angeles, and others who were critical of the film and denounced the film for its portrayal of African Americans, when it won no Oscars, began to complain and threaten to sue the Academy. So, which, so that kind of schizophrenic reaction was kind of amusing. And needless to say, that kind of lawsuit would have probably been thrown out of court, because the Academy has, at that time, 4,500 members, and then people had to vote on what they want to vote for. So, you can't sue somebody for not voting for your picture. so that was, but it was kind of it kind of showed you some of the dynamics that were happening there as well, and within the Academy at that time. By the mid to late 80s, you saw The Last Emperor, and you saw others films, Rain Man, which dealt with autism, Tom Hanks and Dustin Hoffman. That was his second Academy Award, who won Best Picture that year as well. And the end of the decade rounded out in 1989, Driving Miss Daisy won Best Picture. That was the Morgan Freeman and Jessica Tandy, the late Jessica Tandy film, which looked at a relationship between a white Jewish woman in the South and a black man who they came from different worlds, but it was a decade-long friendship. It started from the 1950s and went up to the present day, and rounded out the decade. By the early 90s, you begin to see films like Dances with Wolves, which became the Kevin Costner, which looked at Native Americans, and that won Best Picture. The following year was 1991 was this kind of an interesting year for movies as well. Silence of the Lambs took Best Picture, Jonathan Demme's case. And that was kind of a surprise pick in the sense that people did not necessarily, because the reviews when the movie came out were not really all that well. The movie was not reviewed too well at all. Some people thought it was too gory. Some people thought it was a psycho thriller, and some people just could not grasp around it. But it ended up winning Best Picture. Anthony Hopkins won Best Picture. Jodie Foster won her second Academy Award. She had won previously for The Accused in 1988. As well, that was based on a true story as well. But that was what you saw. And then in the following year, you saw it was almost like 1992 was like Veterans Day at the Oscars. You had like Unforgiven, which won Best Picture with Clint Eastwood. Morgan Freeman had a lot of veteran actors within that particular film, which ended up winning Best Picture as well. And then by the mid 90s, you saw Schindler's List, which looked at the Holocaust, and Steven Spielberg finally gets his first Academy Award. And it was interesting at that particular ceremony. You see Clint Eastwood, who's giving out the Best Director, and when he opens up the envelope, he goes, this is a big surprise, and he goes, the winner is Steven Spielberg for Schindler's List, and then so he was like, it showed you he was shocked because this is a man who was never. Had a lot of great movies. I mean, we think about Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. A number of movies. Raiders of the Lost Ark. E.T. and the Extraterrestrial, but never ever seemed to be really acknowledged by the Academy. And until Schindler's List, where he finally won the Academy Award. He did get the Irving Thalberg Award in 1986, and the Irving Thalberg Award is the award that's giving out to people who's filmmakers and directors who have a consistently high quality film work. That's where he got the Academy Award for that, the Irving Thalberg Award. But other than that, he never really got an Oscar and his first Academy Award for any kind of his actual films that he produced until Schindler's List as well. We begin to see the 90s beginning to look at social issues in film, and at the Oscars they get much more socially conscious. It was also that year that you saw Philadelphia. Tom Hanks was the Academy Award for that performance at Philadelphia, as he plays an AIDS patient at that time as well. Denzel Washington was his co-star, and the movie was timely in the sense that it looked at and brought that issue to the forefront of American society that was going on as well. The following year, Tom Hanks wins another Oscar back-to-back for Forrest Gump, which was a mega successful movie, and it looked at as well. And that was also a very, I would say, very strong year for movies as well. In 1994, you had Forrest Gump, you had Four Weddings and a Funeral, you had Pulp Fiction, you had Shawshank Redemption, and you had Quiz Show, and those are the 5 films that won. Forrest Gump won Best Picture as well. And there are some people who had their opinions about that as well. So, but that was another year as well. And Mel Gibson comes back, not comes back, but he wins in 1995 for Braveheart as well. That comes in 1996. The English Patient wins Best Picture, and it's. Some people feel that's debatable whether it should have won Best Picture or not. I don't know if anybody's ever seen a film, but it's kind of if you show it, you don't see the full screen. It's kind of you only see so much of the screen when it comes on. It's kind of a very long picture, but it's the picture is all British cast as well. So, but it looks at but it definitely it wins Best Picture that well. Some people thought Fargo should have won that year for Best Picture, which was a very, very good film, very, very good film as well. By the 97, you have as good as it gets. And then Titanic actually wins Best Picture that year. Titanic, Leonardo DiCaprio puts him a bona fide star. Kate Winslet, Titanic as well. It also wins 11 Academy Awards, so it ties the record with the most. Nominated films as well in 1997. The following year is even a more shocking upset in 1998. Saving Private Ryan is nominated for Best Picture, and that is another Steven Spielberg. He wins Best Director again. Tom Hanks is in that one as well. But Shakespeare in Love wins Best Picture. And Hollywood is abuzz, and it's major controversy. And Harvey Weinstein gets criticized by some other people for campaigning mercilessly, and they felt he was, there was a lot of resentment in certain circles toward him and Miramax because they felt him and they unprecedentedly shamelessly campaigned for the Oscar, but it won Best Picture that year. And many people thought Saving Private Ryan was almost pretty much a lock for Best Picture, but Shakespeare in Love ends up winning Best Picture that particular year. Now, that's certainly not the first time that a film wins Best Picture.
The word campaign is what I was thinking of. How much influence do these people really go out to get votes for their film or whatever? How much influence does that have on the outcome?
Can have a considerable amount. It depends on who you are and how well influential you are in Hollywood and who's backing your film. I mean, it may not have any. It depends on who you are. If you're an obscure actor or somebody who's not well connected in Hollywood, it may not have too much impact at all. But if you're a person who, if your studio's backing you and wants you to win that Oscar, but if you're a person who has a lot of influence like Harvey Weinstein does in Hollywood, it can be very, very, beneficial and influential. So it depends as well. And then you have American Beauty, which wins in 1999 for Best Picture. That's Kevin Spacey. He wins Best Actor that year as well. And 2000, which is when you start 21st century, kind of a relatively weak year for movies. That was not, matter of fact, some critics argue it was probably the weakest year for movies since 1941. Gladiator wins Best Picture. Okay picture, but it's not the kind of film probably in other years that would have been nominated for the Academy Award. I would say that was probably not a very memorable year for film in general. There were okay nominees, but nothing significant in that particular year that would that we would look back on in history saying that was a good year for the Oscars. The following year, 2001, was considered a year, some critics and some journalists dubbed it as the year of the Black Oscars, in the sense that Sidney Poitier got a Lifetime Achievement Award, an honorary Oscar. He had won before in 1963 for his performance in Lilies of the Field, but he also won they give an honorary award. The Academy Awards tends to give an honorary Oscar out to different people from time to time. That year, he got an honorary Oscar for his intelligent body, for what was considered his intelligent body and choices that he chose in the film industry. It was also Halle Berry wins Best Actress that year. She's also the first African-American woman to win Best Actress for her role in Monsters Ball. Denzel Washington also wins for Training Day, which makes him, at that time, the second African-American to win Best Actor. So it was, many people argued that was a year when African-Americans and African-Americans' achievements were acknowledged and celebrated at the Oscars in 2001. And as the decade goes on, in 2002, you begin to see another upset with Adrian Brody, who wins for The Pianist. He was nominated against some heavy list actors in the following year, in 2001. He was nominated with Jack Nicholson, Nicolas Cage, Michael Caine. These are legendary actors, Daniel Day-Lewis. And Adrian Brody, at that time, who's 29 years old, wins Best Picture, wins Best Actor. And that was a major upset in the upset in a good way in by the Academy. And I don't know if everybody ever saw that particular Oscar telecast. When Halle Berry opens up, she goes, the winner is Adrian Brody. And the audience, half the audience, you can just see their mouths like, and he's like, he himself was like, everybody, they're just like, wow. There was just such a shock. And at 29, he was the youngest actor to win, man to win Best Actor. Previously, it was Richard Dreyfuss, who won for The Goodbye Girl in 1977. He was the best, he won Best Actor at that time. But when Adrian Brody won, he shattered that record. And he's been, at this time, at 29, was still the youngest man to win Best Actor. For his role at that time, you begin to see the decade 2003, 2004, 2004. The following year, you begin to see Sean Penn wins for Mystic River, which is his closest competition that year was Bill Murray in Lost in Translation as well. And then in 2004, Jamie Foxx wins for his performance in Ray, plays the late Ray Charles, which is considered by many a spellbinding performance. Also a pretty strong year for actor. Don Cheadle was in Hotel Rwanda. And Johnny Depp was in Finding Neverland, so it was a pretty good actors that year. But even the following year, Charlize Theron won Best Actress that year for Munster, when she plays the female serial killer Arlene Wuornos out of Florida, which was a very riveting performance in itself. The following year for Best Actor was kind of it was called the Young Man's Oscar. It was a very strong group of competitors, but it was all the actors except for one were under 40 years old. And usually for Best Actor, the men tend to be older, but everyone was the Best Actor nominees that year in 2005 were Philip Seymour Hoffman, the late Philip Seymour Hoffman for Capote, who did win, Heath Ledger for Brokeback Mountain, And you saw Terrence Howard for Hustle and Flow, David Strathairn for Good Night and Good Luck, and Joaquin Phoenix for Walk the Line, which played Johnny Cash. So it's a very, very strong year for Best Actor. I think in any other year, any of those men would probably win the Best Actor. It just showed you how competitive that year was. And Philip Seymour Hoffman won for his performance in Capote, which was a very, very impressive performance, because if anybody knew the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, he was a very big man. I mean, he's a physically large man. And whereas Truman Capote, the late writer, he was kind of a smaller man. He was a small man, very, very kind of wiry and as well. So to be able to lose that amount of weight and put himself in that kind of performance and then transform himself into that character was really, really impressive. And I think that's what I think the Academy was really impressed with, that type of performance as well. Throughout the past several years, you begin to see a number of Oscar performances, beginning to win, come through as well. Whether as diverse as No Country for Old Men, Martin Scorsese finally gets his Oscar in 2006 for The Departed, and he was a person who had been nominated numerous times, but finally wins in 2006, for his role in The Departed. And then you have The Hurt Locker in 2009 with Kathleen Bigelow, who's the first woman to win Best Director. As well. And you have 12 Years a Slave, which is more recent, just this past year. Steve McQueen, a British director, who wins for that. And that's also the first African-American themed film that's won Best Picture. He's also the first African-American to win Best Director, and that just happened this past year as well. And those are, some of the typical highlights of Oscar season as well. What I'd like to talk about right now at this point is actors with the most nominations who have really have won, and Oscars who tend to be favorites of the Academy, as well as those who have really never won an Oscar, and despite numerous performances. The men who've been nominated for the Best Actors awards, has been Jack Nicholson. He's been nominated 13 times. So and another man, it's close there. Denzel Washington has been nominated 8 times. So he's and Al Pacino 8 times. He's been nominated for Best Actor. So these are kind of what you call Academy Award favorites. I guess in many ways they've been nominated multiple times, but they're the ones who've been put in. Those are right now the top 3 actors right now who've been nominated more. But Jack Nicholson has been the most nominated actor. Richard Burton was nominated 8 times, the late Richard Burton, for Best Actor as well. Peter O'Toole was also nominated 8 times, and as well. He got an honorary Oscar. Richard Burton never won an Oscar, and some people believe that was because of the situation with Elizabeth Taylor in Hollywood as well. And on the other hand, his wife Elizabeth Taylor, she won 2 Academy Awards. I mean, she won her first Academy Award for the Butterfield 8. In 1960, and she won for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in 1966. That was in 1960. Some people were surprised there because she herself, Elizabeth Taylor, I'm quoting her, she said it was the worst piece of garbage she ever did. And if you go back and look at that picture, I mean, it was not a bad performance, but it was certainly, I think many people will look back at it. I thought if you look at the nominees that year, Deborah Kerr for The Sundowners was probably the most impressive performance. And she herself, the late Deborah Kerr, who did get an honorary Oscar from the Academy in 1993, she said herself that was she had been nominated 5 times, but she said that was the loss that was the most disappointing to her, because I think that anybody looking at that would have said, well, she probably should have won for that one. But again, it's subjective in the sense that the voters decide. And I think Elizabeth Taylor came back supposedly from the brink of death. So and so she had went through an operation. So some people were sympathetic to that situation as well. But she did win. Now, on the other hand, in 1966 for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, I don't think anybody would dispute that was a fantastic performance. If you've ever seen the movie, it was a very high intensity, riveting performance with her and her husband, Richard Burton, and it was kind of movie probably that you really had to, if you were in a good mood, it's hard to get into a bad mood that day. So it was a very high intense performance, and she was certainly worthy of an Oscar for that performance. But her husband at the time, Richard Burton, was never received an Oscar as well. Even more recent actors like Leonardo DiCaprio, he's been nominated 6 times, but he's never won an Oscar yet, and he's still very young as well. Some people think he suffers from the Steven Spielberg situation, too young, too successful, and there's probably some resentment in Hollywood toward his level of success to be as young as he was. That could very well be true, who knows, but that's, for a very good actor, he's never won an Oscar yet. And also, with Academy Awards, there's a lot of other things that go along behind the scenes that we don't necessarily see as well. There was Kate Winslet who finally won her Oscar after 8 tries, and there was also for The Reader a couple years ago. You also had Geraldine Page, the late Geraldine Page in 1985, who won after 8 tries. So there's a lot of times Oscars are kind of a fluke. Some people get them on the very first nomination, and that's the only Oscar they ever get. But on the other hand, some people, may get after 4 or 5 nominations. Others may take, 8 or might get to their 7th or 8th nomination and finally get it. And then some people never get them, as well. And they may get an honorary Oscar if they get any kind of acknowledgement at all as well. And so we see those dynamics, that take place as well. We also see with the Academy Awards, you see there tends to be a younger voting bloc coming in now, and now you also see foreign language films getting a lot more attention than they did in the past. The foreign language films are certainly much more acknowledged as well, and that's because now the overseas market is very important. Hollywood's kind of being dictated by overseas revenue and international revenue, so they're getting a lot more attention than they normally would have previously. And they've always been foreign language films nominated, but the level of attention they're getting in the Oscars are becoming much more and more significant as time progresses as well. Also in 2012, a woman by the name of Sherilyn Isaacs, who was a movie analyst and executive, she becomes the first African woman to become president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Her name's Sherilyn Isaacs, so she's the first woman, third woman, but first African American to hold that position, and she currently still holds that position, and I think it's a 4-year position as well. And so these are also higher positions. People have always asked about the African American involved in the Oscars. There's definitely been milestones. The first black woman to win an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress was Hattie McDaniel in Gone with the Wind in 1939 as well. And there's, you want to see that on YouTube, it's there. And she gives a speech and talks about it as well, which is pretty much phenomenal for that time, if you think about 1939, to win Best Actress. And so she's the first black person to win Best Actress. And then later on, until 1963, Sidney Poitier becomes the first, wins Best Actor for his role in Lilies of the Field, which was also a very interesting year for actors. There was bittersweet among many in Hollywood about the black community about that. They were very happy that he won the Academy Award, but they were also wondering why did he have to win for such a performance. I don't know if anybody's ever seen Lilies of the Field, but he's working with nuns in the desert in Arizona, and it's a good performance. But some people argue it wasn't really the best performance of that particular year. Some people argue that Tom Jones was probably more impressive than Albert Finney, and Tom Jones, Paul Newman and HUD. I thought we gave a very good performance. And others they thought were probably more powerful performances. This doesn't take away from Sidney Poitier. He certainly deserves a number of Oscars, but some people thought some of his other films, like In the Heat of the Night, or Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, or To Serve with Love, The Defiant Ones, were much more powerful performances. And that kind of goes back to what a lot of people say about the Oscars. And anyway, a lot of times people don't necessarily win the Academy Awards for their best performances, or what people may perceive to be their best performances. I think that's a good example. If you look at Al Pacino as another guy, as I said, nominated multiple times. If you look at the films that he got nominated for, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, The Godfather, but he wins it for Scent of a Woman. A good performance, but is it his best performance, and was it the best performance of that year? Probably not. But again, it kind of goes back to some people tend to get their Academy Awards for their let's look at the body of work, and I think that's what happened with him, as opposed to their actual best. And some people actually do get it for their best performances, as well. And I think that's been a criticism of some people who look at the Oscars. They feel that they don't necessarily reward the performer for his or her best work, and they feel this on the contrary, they tend to get it for mediocre work that's not their best work. And I think that's been a criticism as well. And you can look at other actors themselves. who have won the Oscar over the year and say, well, was that their best work or was it their best picture? And we certainly see that with other pictures as well. Again, a lot of this is subjective, certainly. You know, one person might see as a great picture, someone may not necessarily see. But that is a factor that certainly takes place as well. There are some people who felt.
A question. How is membership in the Academy determined? Are these all individuals who have some experience in the film industry? Are they primarily critics? And what are they looking for in a picture?
A variety of people. You have to be voted. You have to be granted approval by the current members of the board who are there. But there are some are writers, some are actors and fellow actors themselves. Some of them are designers, directors. It's a combination of people within the industry themselves who determine whether who make up the body of the branches. So they come from various aspects of the industry.
The voting members of the Academy, is it true that like a writer can only vote for his field, but that the entire Academy votes for Best Picture?
Yes, certain. I think it's for the directors. I think that is the case. But I think in certain aspects, it depends on the category. I think there are some cases for Best Picture, the entire Academy votes. Yes, certain areas of the Academy, there are other people who vote for different aspects. You have to be a member of that particular segment of the Academy to vote for it. Yes. Yeah. For a minute, before we go any further, I know they said you'll be taking a break and there'll be a question and answer session. So it might be better. I'm going to wrap up here in a few minutes and then let you guys take a break, and then it might be a good time to come back and answer questions then if everybody's okay with that. Okay. What you'll see is a number of people being nominated for their roles that were not necessarily necessarily the best roles. But you also see what I was saying earlier with African Americans at the Academy Awards. There's been a history. Dorothy Dandridge, who died in the 1960s, 65. She was the first black woman nominated for Best Actress for her role in Carmen Jones, and she lost to Grace Kelly in The Country Girl, who won that year as well. But she was the first black woman nominated for Best Actress as well. And over time, you've had a number of black females who been nominated for Best Actress sporadically. In 1972, you had two actresses. You had Cicely Tyson for Sounder, who won the National Board of Reviews for Best Actress, and then you had Diana Ross for Lady Sings the Blues. Now that year, Liza Minnelli won for Cabaret. But you definitely had, and then 2 years later, in 1974, Diane Carroll was nominated for Claudine. But that year, Ellen Burstyn won for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore as well. So you had those so you had black women who've been nominated. In 1985, the first time you had 3 black actors nominated for the same movie, and for The Color Purple, you had Margaret Avery for Best Supporting Actress, Oprah Winfrey for Best Supporting Actress, and Whoopi Goldberg for Best Actress. That was the year Geraldine Page won for The Trip to Bountiful. And that's a good example of another person who was an outstanding actress. But if you look at the performances within itself, one could argue probably that Whoopi Goldberg's performance in The Color Purple was probably a little stronger. Again, my personal opinion. And Geraldine Page did a good job, but she's, Sweet Bird of Youth and Summer and Smoke, Interiors. She's done a whole slew of other films that I would say were certainly more Oscar-worthy than The Trip to Bountiful. And this is not to take away from her performance in that movie, but again, it was not arguably her best performance. A good performance, but not her best performance. 2004, you kind of see those about performances as well. You saw films that won that year. $1 Million Baby won Best Picture. Again, that was kind of like I would say that was similar to 1980, not 1980, pardon me, but it was kind of not 2000, certainly a better year than 2000, but it was one of those years that's probably not going to be a memorable year. There were solid films. You had, Ray, you had, $1 Million Baby, and several others, Munster and others were nominated for Best Picture, but none of them were what you would call probably films that we'll be talking about 20 years from now. But it was a solid year for films, but not what you call a memorable year for films. I think if you look back at the Academy Awards in certain years, you can look at it and say these films were fantastic. And I would say a good example of that was 1939. If you look at 1939, you had Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you had The Wizard of Oz, you had Gone with the Wind, you had Nicotisha, and you had a whole slew of films that were it was probably one of the most memorable years in Hollywood as far as the power that came out of the films there. That year, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington won Best Picture. and that was when that time they had like 9 or 10 nominees for film. Good film as well. There was so many good films that year. It probably had trouble. I thought personally that year, I thought The Wizard of Oz was the best film of all that year as well, and it was because it was dealing with a lot of issues that were happening at the Great Depression at that time, and the Emerald City was Washington, and all those type of things that had a lot of symbolic messages to it. But it was a very, very powerful year for the movie studios, and it was the beginning of what you call the Hollywood heyday as well. And you begin to see, the regalness and the type of issues that are going on that made Hollywood memorable. You had the radio at that time. You didn't have television, so what you could hear from the radio. So and so, Joan Crawford is coming up here with and Clark Gable just got out of the of the limousine. So you didn't see this unless you were there in Hollywood itself. So you had to hear these, and people would just sat by the radio and ate this information up because it was something that was the closest they could get to Hollywood stars. And you also had people like gossip columnists at the time, like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, who were very, very influential. And gossip columnists today don't have nowhere near that type of power, but they can still be influential. But at that time, stars had much more. Their fates were handled by gossip columnists because you had the radio, and if they didn't like you, they could certainly just how they would phrase a situation could certainly potentially derail or ruin your career. And they were very, very feared women in Hollywood. And Oscar time came around, they were always getting gifts from the studio, and studios were always sending them, bottles of wine and certificates to whatever stores in Hollywood were there. So they were kind of trying to get their good graces when the Academy came out because they wanted good press for their stars and to promote them as well. So they were very influential in the Oscar race. The level of influence of gossip columns for us, the Academy Awards began to decline by the mid-60s. They didn't have the same level of influence that previous Oscar that they had in previous generations, but they were certainly very influential people. And they also, the two I mentioned in particular, Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper. And there's a book by the name called Malice in Wonderland, which talks about both of those individuals, if anybody's interested in who they are and what their power that they had in Hollywood at that particular time as well. And they scared people like Louis B. Mayer, who nobody really intimidated too much. So if you could scare him, that shows you how much power you had. As they said, he would stand up whenever she walked to his office or whatever, as well. Talk about both him and Hedda Hopper, Luella Parsons. That was the dynamics of it. Recently, we're beginning to see nominations that are coming out. The Academy Awards just went back to nominate. It used to be 5 nominees for Best Picture. Since 2008, they've moved it up to 10. Well, it's a sliding scale anywhere from 5 to 10. Last year was 9. This past year probably was 9, and the year before was 10. So there's really no set number now they nominated, and I think that was probably done for economic reasons. They want to make sure that people, as many people, tune into the Oscars as well. And years ago that was the case up until about 1950. There were like several nominees, and then they narrowed it down to 5, and now they brought it back to 10 and 10 again, or depending upon the number, up to 10 is what they will accept for Best Picture today as well. This past year, 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture, like I said, and it was the first African-American theme to win Best Picture as well. We're talking about Oscar season now coming up because we're pretty much getting close to October, and the films that tend to get nominated for Oscar will be coming out over the next several months, and we'll see who is more likely to win. Right now, it's too early to tell, but there's they're talking about Ben Affleck's film Gone Girl is being looked at right now as a possible Oscar contender. All by Myself, the Jimi Hendrix film that just came out last week, is being considered an Oscar contender. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see the kind of mix that will come out. There's a lot of historical biopics that are coming out that may be considered. Selma, which is coming out in December, which looks at the Selma civil rights movement in 1965. Lee Daniels is directing that. He also did The Butler last year with Oprah Winfrey and Forest Whitaker. So there are some other ones I think that may be coming out looking at there. So that should be kind of interesting to see what what's coming down the pike there, and we'll see as well. At this point, I think I'll stop and let you guys take a break. This is the question and answer session, and at this point, I'll be happy to entertain any questions you may have at this point.
Well, my question question has to do with the studios. I know way back, like in the 20s and 30s and 40s, the studios, the heads of the studios had a lot of power and influence where they would loan actors out to, but I don't quite understand that. How did that, what made that process change? Now it seems like the actors are a little bit more, they take more responsibility. Is it has to do with agents, or is it because it just, the flavor of the studios changed?
Largely the latter. By the early 1960s, as I said earlier in my talk, the studio system began to rapidly lose authority over the stars. In a sense, the stars were much more, television came into the picture, and movies were not doing as well, and yet they had a lot of competition. And that time, just the world around was changing. You know, people were becoming, some stars had a lot more influence, you know, and could also bargain their power. In the 40s and 30s, you didn't have that same level of access to issues. You had to be under a star, whether it was MGM or whether it was 20th Century Fox, which was going through significant financial troubles in the early 1960s, and did not know if it was going to last itself as a movie studio. So you had a lot of factors there, economic factors, there's also social factors that were happening within the country, and stars just began to have more autonomy. At that time, you had stars. Years ago, when you weren't acting, you were taking dancing lessons, singing lessons, or whatever. You were always, you know, honing your craft. That's not probably so much today the case as well. And in some cases now you have stars who actually have parts of the studio themselves, or you know, have a lot of influence themselves, and you know, may have just as can, you know, finance their own projects and stuff. So it's a much different world.
Well, I'm sorry.
I read somewhere where the early Academy Awards were rigged. Can you speak to that?
I have no knowledge of that particularly, and I don't want to give you misinformation. I don't know if they were necessarily rigged in the sense, they very well could have been. It was a very short ceremony, and it was, like I said, 25 minutes, you know, 35 minutes, and at Louis B. Mayer's home, and they gave out the awards, and they had dinner afterwards. So, I mean, if it was rigged in the sense they may have already been told they were going to win, or they were going to nominate you this year, that may be seen as rigging, but I'm not sure if that was, you know.
I believe the exact words that the studios negotiated who would win this year and who would win next year.
That could very well, at that time, that could have very well been possible. I mean, again, I don't have definitive information on that, but that could very well, that could very well be possible. Sorry.
Why is it that the films that are nominated for the Best Picture award are only considered if they come out toward the end of the year? If you're a producer or director who has a film, an excellent film that comes out in March, April, May, or June, or July, you're virtually overlooked. Why is that?
No, sometimes there's been some films like Crash that came out early in 2005 that won Best Picture. So every now and then you do have a film that comes out early in the year that does win Best Picture as well. Annie Hall, that came out in the summer of 1977. But by and large, it does tend to be the holiday season because they're probably fresher in people's minds largely. But you do have a couple of examples where films who do come out earlier in the year or in the middle of the year have won Best Picture as well. But you are right. For most of the time, most studios tend to release their films around, you know, holiday season, November, Thanksgiving, or Christmas, because they feel that they'll be most likely in voters' minds, because voting season starts in February, and they feel, well, if something comes out in December, it's still in your mind, whereas if it came out in the previous April, it may not. But in some cases, you know, again, films that come out earlier in years have won.
I grew up enjoying the Western movies, and my all-time favorite when I was younger, it's still a pretty good movie, I think, was High Noon with Gary Cooper. How many Western movies and Western stars have won Academy Awards?
John Wayne won for True Grit in 1969, and High Noon, Gary Cooper, you know, won Best as actor. Westerns have been very popular at the movies, and they've also been very popular on television, for that matter. Dances with Wolves, one could argue that was a Western too on some level, but they've had, you know, a certain degree of respectability at the Oscars, but the number of Westerns that have actually won Best Picture have been not that many overall, but they've certainly been acknowledged. The actors who played those roles may have won the awards, but Westerns have not necessarily dominated the Oscar-winning category.
Did Django get any kind of recognition at all, or is it in any category that people would have enjoyed? I thought it was a wonderful movie. Liked it.
It got considered for Best Picture, I believe, and Quentin Tarantino was considered for Best Director. Outside of that, I don't remember any other nominations that it got. I think maybe it might have been written screenplay or something like that, but no actor, actress nominations.
What's the movie?
Django Unchained, Quentin Tarantino's.
I know that the movies affect the culture, and then the culture affects the movies. It goes both ways. So which movies do you think influence the culture the most?
Are you talking about Oscar-winning movies, or? I would say probably Kramer versus Kramer. Probably did, given the subject matter. Crash, I think, given with race relations at that time in Los Angeles and nationwide. That's a very good question. American Beauty, to a degree, I think did, looking at, the transformation of suburbia and the type of people who are more likely to be your neighbors, as well. Those would be the top three right now. I would say that kind of would influence society, and that would have an direct impact toward the larger society, about the winning films.
When you see a list of the top 50 movies of all time, many times Citizen Kane appears right at the top of that. What would be your choice for the top 3 movies that you have seen?
Do they have to be winning movies, or they are just not movies? Any movies. Oh, wow. I would say, again, I'm a big fan of Wizard of Oz. I think that was really good for a lot of reasons, because I looked at, the economic issues that were facing the Great Depression and did it in a very, very colorful way. And it's interesting with The Wizard of Oz, they always show that around Easter and Christmas time for kids. And it's a very adult-themed movie. I mean, and I was wondering why they always, kind of classified it as a child's movie, because it's a very adult movie. And at the time when it came out, it was very adult. It was looking, as I said, the Emerald City was Washington, and the Cowley Skin Man was dealing with farmers in the Midwest, the Scarecrow character, and the Tin Man was dealing with the steel industry, and a lot of other things in the film that were very, very, looking at economics in many ways. But for some reason, it's always been seen as a children's movie, as well. But I think the movie The Wizard of Oz, I think, had an impact, certainly at the time. I would say there's so many good ones. I would say that my favorites, I also liked Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I thought that was a really good film with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, because in so many ways it broke the barrier of what people could say on screen, and it was also, it started new ratings. It was kind of just a very, very unusually well done film in many ways, and I think it also dealt with, the dark side of human nature, in the sense that things you did not see, on screens at that time, and showed you how the facades that some people may have put up. She was the daughter of the college president. He was a college professor, Richard Burton, and it kind of looked at so many other the sides of human nature that people tend to try to conceal in many ways, and it was kind of exposed that evening with the younger couple with George Siegel and Sandy Dennis. So I thought that movie did a lot of very good things as well. And I would also say Shawshank Redemption, I think, was really good. It came out 20 years ago. I thought that was a movie that's very, very, and didn't get a lot of attention when it first came out initially, but a very movie that looked at, relationships, issues with corruption, looked at, relationships across race, also looked at the dynamics of, prison life, but also looked at integrity and perseverance and dealing with adversity on many levels. So I think the film had so many issues as well. But those would be my 3 right now, I think.
Going back to the question that Helen asked about film's influence in society, I read an article, I guess just yesterday, talking about Gone with the Wind and how it contributed to this lost cause type of thing in the South, the romanticizing the Civil War and the South's cause, and also led to some of this neo-Confederate type of movement. Do you have any comments on that?
I think Gone with the Wind certainly was well received in many areas of the South when it came out, also in 1939, like The Wizard of Oz as well. Yeah, I think it certainly for those who had had a fond memory of the Confederacy and felt that the Confederacy was, who embraced, the message and the symbols that the Confederacy advocated. It was good for them, as well. But I think there are other groups of people who were definitely would not necessarily embrace it as well. My grandmother, for example, would not let me and my siblings, older siblings, see the movie when it first came out. I was real young and I wasn't born until late '60s, but when it would always show, she would not want to see that that film for obvious reasons, for as well. So it depends on where you were in your value system at that time, I'd say. But it is considered a classic, regardless.
Was To Kill a Mockingbird nominated for Academy Awards, and was it nominated for Best Picture?
Yes, on both counts. It didn't win, but it won.
It's just, it was a classic
Right.
book.
Now, Gregory Peck won that year for Best Actor. He won Best Actor for 1962, but the film was nominated, but it didn't win Best Picture. Lawrence of Arabia won that year. Yeah. Somebody had asked me earlier about, we were talking about, had a conversation about some of the best films who did not win. A lot of times films who were considered, who have stood the test of time. Like you said, and Sharon was saying, there's definitely To Kill a Mockingbird, didn't win Best Picture, but it stood, the test of time. The Maltese Falcon, Giant. You can go back and look at a number of films that were really very powerful films that didn't necessarily win Best Picture, but they have stood the test of time in many ways. And so actually, talked about even more Shawshank Redemption, than the films that actually really won Best Picture. So that just kind of shows winning an Academy Award to be an Academy Award winning film. Yes, you are in the history books and you're there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your film will necessarily sustain any type of longevity. It may and it may not, but you might even be a film who didn't even win Best Picture, but you could still be seen in many, many years down the road as a film that people will still embrace and look at, And this is not to take away from the Academy Awards, but they are what they are. They're awards, and they're nice, but they don't necessarily ensure a longevity in a career. I mean, if you look at people who've won, Academy Awards, if you like Ben Kingsley, it's an okay career, but it's not. It hasn't been it's not been a very, very, high level career. I mean, there's no disrespect to Mr. Kingsley, but I don't think nobody would say he was an A-list actor, or somebody, on the other hand, Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Cruise, Samuel Jackson. These are people who have not won Oscars, or Adam Sandler, Eddie Murphy, never even been nominated for Oscars. In the case of Adam Sandler, Eddie Murphy, but have had very, very strong careers. So I think an Academy Award is good recognition, but it doesn't necessarily ensure a great a very, very longevity of a career, or even a very prominent career. It may and it may not. So.
This list of the greatest movies I saw were maybe a year ago. The movie Vertigo overtook the other one, with the other famous one by Orson Welles. I forget.
Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane. But then I saw Vertigo, on cable, so I saw it all the way through, and it just seemed like a little bit of a thriller type thing, but it didn't impress me anywhere near as much as a movie like Citizen Kane. So that's, of course, my take on it, but it kind of surprised me. When I saw the movie, I expected it to be a little bit more than it was.
I think what helped Vertigo was, at the time, was kind of relatively new when it came out in 1958, and Kim Novak was extremely, they said she was the one who brought men into the film, because she was a very attractive actress and young actress at the time, Kim Novak, and it was the scenes in the movie, how they were done, and just like the special effects for the time. We're talking about 1958. People had not seen anything quite like that earlier on that film, and as well. And speaking of, Hitchcock films, he's another person that never got he got an honorary Oscar. He died in 1980, but he never was, none of his films ever got nominated for Best, or never won Best Picture, which people say that was kind of a slight, because if you look at some of the films whether you like the film or not, but Psycho, I mean, that was revolutionary for its time in 1960. I mean, and for that to not, even be considered, or Anthony Perkins not even get an Oscar nomination for that kind of performance, unless he was mentally insane. I mean, come on, so, I mean, that was like, what is going, so it was just clear that some people thought Alfred Hitchcock was kind of an outsider, and I think a lot of it had to do with his personal life, and toward his, a wife and this and that. But I think that, because a lot of those politics came into play. But I think that's, as well, it had a lot to do with it. Richard Burton was another one earlier. I think that he never got the Academy Award because I don't think people ever forgave him for leaving his wife, and Richard Elizabeth Taylor at that time. That was, and I think Hollywood was never going to really give him an Oscar because of that, as well. And I think back then it was much more of a image to Hollywood wanted to portray to Middle America and others that we are still family value oriented, whether they practice what they preach or not. But I think those things came into play too. But Vertigo, to your question, in the sense that it was unique for the time, the scenery and the vivid imageries. You see Kim Novak falling down from that, from that balcony toward the end of the film and stuff. That was kind of revolutionary for the time period as well. Citizen Kane, many people consider that the best movie ever made. I think that's debatable. I mean, I think it was okay, but I wasn't. It was a good movie, but I wasn't. I think there were certainly better movies. I mean, granted, for its time, 1941, it was certainly a very, very revolutionized movie. But I would say it was the best movie of all time ever made. But I think that's up for debate. Personal opinion. I think that's up for debate.
Tatum O'Neal was the youngest female to get the Academy Award. Tatum O'Neal for Paper Moon.
Was she tied with Anna Paquin for the piano? At the time, she was.
So. What did you feel about that, her being even like she was I thought she was cute in the movie, but I didn't. First of all, who was she up against, and was it her cuteness that? I don't know.
It was she won in 1973 for Paper Moon, and her father was in part of it. Ryan O'Neal was in it as well. I forget all the actors nominees that year in particular who were up there, but she was up against, obviously, for just by her age, much older actresses. But it was good. And Tatum O'Neal, she hasn't done a lot, but she's been on a couple of television shows recently, a couple of TV series that came out 5 or 6 years ago on CW and others. But she's a good actress. I mean, she was a young actress at that time, but I think it was the cute factor there at that time. I think the same thing with Anna Paquin. I mean, I thought, it was a cute factor. And also at that time in the early 70s, as I said in my talk, the Academy Awards was going through a lot of, flux. The awards were being under constant criticism, and some people would not show up to receive their awards. So there was a lot of politics going on. I think there was a way to, I think they were looking for anything that was going to bring interest. Voters, I think, would be to bring interest in maybe, and politics could have came into that decision, as well.
I agree with you about the Shawshank Redemption being very good, but I don't remember it being highly acclaimed at the time.
It wasn't, yeah.
Why do you think it was not better recognized? I think it's wonderful because, and I still think about certain scenes in it, and I saw it back when it was new,
right,
a long time ago.
Well, when I first saw it, I was a graduate student at the University of Maine, 20 years ago, 1994. I think the film was not necessarily marketed well when it came out at first. And also, I think Forrest Gump came out that summer and just took so much energy from all the other films as well. But I think it was an excellent film, like I said, because it's one of those kind of films, even when it's on TV, you'll stop and watch it. No matter what's on Shawshank Redemption, you talk to anybody, they'll stop and pause and at least watch parts of it because that's just the kind of impact that film has had on people. But I think I consider it a classic, and I would put it certainly in the top 5 of my films.
Just to answer to the curiosity question about Tatum O'Neal. The other people in the Best Supporting Actress category was Madeline Kahn for Paper Moon, Candy Clark for American Graffiti, and Linda Blair for The Exorcist.
Oh, wow.
And there's comments,
that makes sense. It answered your question.
There's comments in this article about Tatum O'Neal, and I didn't see the cuteness factor, but sometimes the voters can't resist when you give a child adult dialogue. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's how they, described it. So
that's fine. I agree, and I think that is good. Although The Exorcist that time when it came out too was very a controversial film. Extremely controversial, and and I was kind of initially, even for Hollywood stands, apparently it sent shockwaves to Hollywood when it first came out, just how it was when it was done, because it was dealing with the occult and things of that nature that was really happening. And apparently some really unusual things happened on the set at that time and stuff. They tried to keep concealed, but it was a very, very, very controversial movie on a number of levels.
Morgan Freeman I just saw something on the internet that he said, and they asked him why he thought the movie wasn't as successful when it first came out. He says it was the word Shawshank. He said they didn't know what it was, and they still don't know. Maybe is that the name of the prison or what? I don't know.
Yeah. Yes.
But they didn't know, they couldn't identify with it.
And initially they were going to call it Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, but decided to just call it the Shawshank Redemption. So, and I think exactly, well, because based on the novel, the guy had pictures of Rita Hayworth in his prison cell and stuff. But that's why they were going to name it that title, give it that title. I think movies and titles have a lot to do with it's important that you title. I think titles, we underestimate sometimes the power of titles and how they can impact on not even just movies, television. I think a good example of a television show here, not to deviate too much, but Friday Night Lights. People thought football, and it really didn't deal with football too much at all. It was dealing about personal relationships and everything. It was an excellent show, but I think people thought Friday Night Lights, football, and that was, and I think the ratings on the show were so-so, but it was a really good show. Also, the show that went off the air a couple of years ago called Desperate Housewives. Initially, they were going to call it Wisteria Lane, and I don't think it would have had the same ratings if it, and Mark Cherry was determined. He said, no, I want this to be called Desperate Housewives, and I think they had a lot more, of an impact, because I think titles are very, very crucial. So, and I think Morgan Freeman was exactly right on that, on that one.
Maybe they should have kept Rita Hayworth in the title.
I don't know if it would have even done that well. Because I wonder how many. I don't want to sound sexist, but I wonder how many guys would have went and saw it at that point. There was Rita Hayworth. They would probably thought it was a woman's film. Because people don't do the research. They just hear a title and something. And they would just go ahead and like the film now called Gone Girl right now. And the fact that Ben Affleck's in it, people they may go see it. But if it was just called Gone Girl and you didn't know it was in a film, people would assume it's a woman's film. Because of the title, people make those assumptions wrong. A lot of times, so I think that it's very, very important. I think that now we have much more marketing and the internet and everything else, so that people can do their research and find out who's in the film, what the subject matter is about, etc. before they even go see it. But at that time, we didn't have the internet was not quite here yet; it was on its way. But so I think that had a lot to do with the title and stuff.
Are there movies that won Best Picture that have never been heard from again?
Well, they haven't been talked about, but certainly. But I think I would say, Cimarron. That was one Best Picture. People don't talk about that one an awful lot. Around the World in 80 Days. People don't really talk about that one too much. I think there, as well. I think there are a lot. Even as good as it is, The Apartment. I think that was a good film, but I don't think people talk about The Apartment too much. Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, as well. I think so. There are a number of A Man for All Seasons, that one in 1966. And people don't talk about that one too much. I think there are a number of ones, that have won Best Picture. That a lot of films people don't. Older ones, younger ones, more recent ones. Even today, they may talk, but they may not necessarily be. They may be surprised they won, but they still talk about. But older films, I think they got lost. Kind of in there, and unless you do research or things on them, people don't talk about the ones I just mentioned too much.
To follow up on that. How about the actors and actresses that win the Academy Award and then you never hear from them again?
That is true in some cases, yeah.
Has anyone ever done a study or some kind of investigation on what happens to them?
I think there's not too much. Matter of fact, I'm interested in looking at that down the road, so, myself, as well. But yeah, there's some people who won, like I said, I said earlier, who win Oscars, and sometimes you never hear from them again. If you look at back in 1946 and 1947, or some of those people are dead now, probably. But if you even look in the 70s, some people who won Oscars and have had okay careers. Glenda Jackson, for example, she won in 1970 for Two Women, and in 1973. She also won there as well. The kind of career that sometimes people with Oscars win. On the other hand, Denzel Washington's a fantastic career, A-lister again. So it just depends on a lot of the, and again, like I said, the Academy Awards has a lot to do with even Adrian Brody. He was very young when he won.
That's the one I
He's done, he's been on a couple of TV shows and he's done some movies, but he does a lot of art house movies, and he's a producer behind the scenes. I mean, it's not like these people are impoverished or anything like that. They're doing financially well, but the point is that their careers don't necessarily, take off. Richard Dreyfuss, when he won the Academy Award in 1977 for The Goodbye Girl, he himself said he said a very eclectic career, but I would not say that eclectic. He said a very, very predictable career in the sense of the type of films he's taken. And he said himself, because he said he thought it was kind of he imposed it upon himself. He said winning the Academy Award so early, he said it made him less willing to be adventurous. He said because he's always played straight men, and he said because he was just he didn't want to deviate from that. And he said in some ways that kind of was he said he probably could have branched out in other roles, because some actors are very versatile, like Jack Nicholson's and the Denzel Washington and others. But he said winning the Academy Award so early for that role made him more cautious about, he said he decided to play straight men, always playing teachers or bankers or accountants and others. And he's made a good career doing that, but he said himself he deliberately took those kind of roles.
Yeah, and his last movie I saw him in was a real stinker. So I'm wondering if he was just taking anything he could get at that point.
He's at the stage of his career probably, actors like anything else, it's probably more problematic for women in the industry, but, he's at the age now probably, that Hollywood and an industry that values youth, he's not young anymore. So I think in that sense he's definitely, probably, who knows the reason why he took it, but probably maybe to stay relevant, or it's,
But that's a good point. I mean, the good actors are the ones who branch out and do a variety of roles.
Right.
So that they don't get stereotyped into one kind of character.
But on the other hand, you have some actors who deliberately choose certain types of roles too, I'd say, because they want that niche. I would say somebody like a Jessica Lange. For the most part, she always played like country women, rural women, whether it's Patsy Cline or she would play or play roles like Sissy Spacek. Her early roles, she always played like the victim type roles. If you look at her earlier career, Sissy Spacek, whether it was Marie or coal miner's daughter, a woman who was always in distress. So I think some actors deliberately choose certain type of roles and who are good actors for that image. Now years ago, that was a lot of times the case. Hollywood would certainly, if you look at old stars, Sidney Poitier always played the Good Samaritan. He always came in, and he was always educating white America about, prejudice or whatever the case would be. Burt Lancaster was always the shady guy. Deborah Carr was always the adulterous woman. Joan Crawford was always the woman who was in distress one way or the other. Betty Davis was always the evil woman. William Holden was the playboy, and so on and so on. And I think it was much easier for Hollywood at that time, because if a script came, this is for so-and-so, so it's easy to, we'll call it, this is so-and-so, this is the perfect role for this person or that person. And that's when I said during those days when Hollywood was much more, stars were much more packaged and you had an image and you portrayed that role. That began to change by the 1960s. Again, like I said, stars became the studio system was going through a lot of flux and everything else. And then, stars, like I said, nowadays play much more dimensional, many of them play many multi-dimensional roles, and are able to. But back then, I think stars were a little more pigeonholed. They were pigeonholed because of that as well. And it was the nature of the beast at that time as well.
When it comes to Academy Awards, it seems that a lot of the big blockbusters like Harry Potter, Star Wars, these types of films are ignored for Best Picture. They receive awards for special effects or for costumes or whatever the category is. But here are films that bring in millions and that make stars out of their stars, and yet they never receive Academy Awards. Whereas, as you said, in the older days, it seemed to take the Academy Award to get these people on the audience's radar, so that then they became the big blockbuster stars.
Yeah, I agree. Films like Harry Potter, the Academy Awards, and I think as the voter membership gets younger, and you're going to probably see, I'd say in the next 20 years, you'll probably see the type of films that get nominated will probably be very different. I mean, you're seeing that kind of now. 20 years ago, films like Django Unchained would never have been nominated, probably by the older members of the Academy. It just would not have been because of the violence and the type of subject matter. And it was almost like the running joke that the films at the Academy Awards, the film with the thickest British accent would always win, or some type of, and Academy Award movies historically tended to make about a certain amount of money, and I think if you're too commercial, with some people, you're not necessarily Oscar worthy because, that's the way that elitism comes in. Now, there are certainly films that made a lot of money that won Best Picture. Forrest Gump made a substantial amount of money and won Best Picture, but I think at that time it used to be, if you're an Academy Award winning film, you had to make a certain amount of money, not too much money. Now, after the film won, you got re-released again as well because all those politics came into it. But no, I think that there is that tendency to films like Harry Potter. They're not seen as Oscar worthy because of the subject matter. Again, comedies, as I said earlier, comedies, and people, even actors themselves say comedy is probably the most difficult form of acting you can do because it's about timing and everything else. This is not to take away from drama, but comedy, they said comedy is probably the hardest thing you can do because it's about timing. Drama can be all of us sitting here talking about a crisis of our lives or whatever. Nobody's expecting to be entertained in a drama necessarily. But a comedy, if it falls flat, the lines aren't there. If it fizzles, it's about timing, and it's probably much more difficult to do. But the Academy Awards has not necessarily seen that, comedy, and I thought a good example of somebody who was not nominated for an Oscar who should have won, or at least been nominated for that role about 10 years ago. And some people may disagree with this, was Eddie Murphy in The Nutty Professor, and how he played all those characters he played and how he was able to do it. That took a really, really talented person to pull off all those multiple roles that he played. And the Academy would have never considered something like that, because it was a comedy. And I think, as I said, the last comedy, it was a romantic comedy to win Best Picture was Annie Hall in 1977. So that just shows you comedies in general are not really embraced by the Academy. Now that may very well change, I think you'll definitely probably see that change. I would say probably within the next decade, you'll see as the Academy voters get younger and stuff, you'll probably see films who would not have been necessarily nominated will be, And I think that was some of the things, but Do the Right Thing, when it came out in 1989, some people consider that would certainly, some critics said that was the best film of that year, 1989, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, but the Academy didn't necessarily touch it because of the subject matter, and and we're talking about a quarter of a century ago, and it was just probably a little too controversial at that time. Yes.
It happened to Young Knight. Didn't that one win an award, or was that a pro award?
It won a couple of awards. Yeah, it had one. I think it might have won Best Picture that year too. Yeah, and I think that was another one. The Philadelphia Story was about at that time until it came out.
Right. That was another one.
Right. And that was Katharine Hepburn and Jimmy Stewart as well.
You've mentioned a couple of times about the Academy getting younger. What is the reason for that?
Well, people just, I'm not being flippant, but people die off. People die, people just, that's how,
There's always been young people involved.
But you have to be select. I'm saying the membership tends to get, they choose people from their branch who work in the industry, as I said, different people as well. So they're going to be, and they just probably have a different taste in movies. Somebody who's a 27-year-old artist or a graphic designer at the Academy may very well have a different taste. I don't want to generalize, than somebody who's 68 years old and, what they consider a movie, what they would nominate. Like The Social Network, for example. I have no doubt in my mind that The Social Network, there was a group of young people who saw that movie, which was looking at, Facebook and others. There was a block of young voters who saw that and were very impressed with it. And it was a good movie. But it was definitely, I think there was no doubt in my mind, The Social Network would not have been nominated 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And I think they saw that. But I think that's why it did not win Best Picture, because I think a lot of older voters did not think it was worthy of winning a Best Picture, nomination as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with, and that's what I'm saying, I think the taste. And I think in the next decade or so, you're going to see a lot more movies of that kind of nature, or maybe not necessarily The Social Network per se, but films of a certain type of film you're going to see being nominating the Academy Awards that you would not have seen otherwise. Does that kind of answer your question, or? Okay. But I want to make sure I answer your question. So what explain a little further.
I'm just wondering if it's just. Are we more concerned now with younger people? Is it because of the culture? Or, there's always been young people involved in films, right? But yeah. Why all of a sudden is it considered that the younger people are going to have more control?
Well, Hollywood also too, people go see movies, and also the consumer market, there's a lot of people in that age group, and they're big. And if you look at the movies that come out now, the blockbusters and things, they're aimed toward a younger audience. It doesn't mean the people older cannot go see them, but it's clear they're aiming toward a younger audience because they feel there's a money to millennials, Generation Y, just their numbers alone. The buying power they have, and and they want to cater to that market. We're talking about 70 million people born between 1980 and 1998. That's the millennials, and they're a very influential market, and there are people want to, that's who they're catering to, and they're the ones who are going to spend money on movies and merchandise related to movies, and and the things that go along. So that's from a business standpoint, that makes practical sense why you would want to cater movies to that audience.
So it comes back to the cultural thing that we are just shifting more and more younger.
That and also economics.
Appealing to younger, yeah.
Yeah, and economics.
You mentioned people getting pigeonholed or wanting to stay pigeonholed, and Tom Cruise, even though I don't agree totally with his the religion he follows and blah blah.
Scientology.
But he's a 50-year-old guy now, and he's a good actor. He's been in some really good movies as a younger person, but he keeps making these action movies, and I just say to myself, why doesn't he? I mean, he's a good actor, so why doesn't? And he's rich. Why doesn't he? It's like Robert De Niro. I mean, at a point in time, he made some excellent movies, and then he's in the Towering Inferno and Meet the Fockers and all this stuff. And it's like, one of the best actors of our generation. Does he need to be in some of these movies? I understand it's money, but I don't know. I'd rather see the person waiting for the right role and then doing his thing than making either kind of crappy movies or in Tom Cruise's case, these action movie after action movie. At some point, he's not going to be able to make those anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, well, Tom Cruise is another example. I think he almost has that Leonardo DiCaprio situation. Been nominated. I think there's a lot of jealousy toward he's successful so young and very well liked and a major box office draw. I thought he's done he's somebody who's done an eclectic body of work. He's done Born on the 4th of July. Oh, yeah. He's done a lot of diversity of films that he's been involved in. As well. Collateral and that with Jamie Foxx is like that when he played Hitman. I thought one of his best films personally was Jerry Maguire. I thought I thought the script was beautiful. If you listen to the dialogue in the movie, it was beautifully written. Renee Zellweger was in the movie, but I thought that was one of his better films. I thought that was really, really good. I think Tom Hanks is a very hard-working actor. I think he's good. I think they're better actors, but I think he's a very hard-working actor, and he's good at what he does, and he takes his craft very seriously. And he was very well, and I think he was kind of like came along at the right time in many ways. I think he was Hollywood was looking for a golden young man at that time, and he kind of fit that mold. Something with Top Gun and some of the other films he done, earlier films. So I think he played that as well. You mentioned Robert De Niro. Certainly one of the better actors of our generation, but. I think Robert De Niro is one of those kind of people that's kind of adventurous anyway, and I'm sure maybe financial considerations come into play, but I think that he's always he does some work, but he always does something that's kind of outfield out there, like something like almost like the late Robin Williams. He was also another person who did a very, very unpredictable, Mrs. Doubtfire, but also good Dead Poet Society and Awakenings, and I think some people try to be as diverse as possible, but on the other hand, you got people who can do stay with that kind of niche, as well. And that's all, a matter of choice, I guess, and how they wanted to define their careers. For some people, it's a good decision, probably some people are not. On the other hand, yes, some people who make very good, they don't necessarily make good movie star choices, but they make good acting choices. Laura Linney, I think, is a good example of a woman who's a very good actress. She hasn't necessarily made good movie choices, but she's made very, very good acting choices as far as the characters that she plays, whether it's in a TV or a movie. She does some very good roles, but she hasn't really starred in movies that academically do well at the box office. I don't think she's really made good movie star choices. And I think there is a difference in choosing good acting roles as opposed to making roles that are going to make you a bona fide movie star. And I think you find that with a lot of stars. I think they're really, choose their roles well, and may not necessarily be the best actors, but they choose their roles very, very cleverly.
Well, getting back to actors and actresses, I have to admit I haven't seen many current movies because I find them very disappointing. And I'm not sure if I feel the quality of the acting is, or when you think about performances by Vivian Leigh, Elizabeth Taylor, the riveting performances. Like the first time I saw Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, those two knocked me off my feet. I just watched it.
That's why, as I said earlier, that film just really mesmerized me.
It's still to this day when I think about it, I can really. But I see movies today, and I don't know if it's because they need to make the money now. It's more of I don't know. I just rather. And I'm just asking. My question is, who would you consider today's actors or actresses that are worthwhile like that. I mean, I just don't see them.
I think they're out there. I think again you have to hunt for them, and I think also too that there are still movie actors that are really, really good. I think that some stars now have gone, very, very commercial, and the movies in general, the overseas market has a lot to do with it too. So they're also targeting that as well. That's why you see so many sequels like Spider-Man 10 or whatever, as well. But I think you during the holiday seasons you tend to see good movies. I think Daniel Day-Lewis is a very good actor. I think he certainly does very quality work, pretty much high quality work, and you can always count on him to deliver. I think even though he does a variety of films, Samuel Jackson I think is also a very good actor. I think even though the film may be so-so, but he's definitely, his performance comes in. Denzel Washington's another one I think that comes through, that you can always count on. Even if the film's not that great, he'll deliver. I think that Robert De Niro, again, I think his performance will come out, and I think that there are a number. As far as female actors, I think, Meryl Streep, I don't think even if the movie's not that good, I've never seen her performance before, and I think, I'd say that Julianne Moore, I think she's another one. I think is really one of my favorites. I think she's very, very good. Very, very good. She's a very versatile actress as well. And
Helen Mirren.
Helen Mirren as well. She's and but Kate Blanchett and Kate Winslet. I mean, all the ones you just mentioned, Kate Blanchett, Winslet. I think there are a number of. I'd say Angela Bassett. I mean, I think is another one. I think does really good work. I think so. I mean, they're out there. I mean, and I think this, and again, that comes back to a matter of opinion. But I think that.
Those are older actors. I think Meryl Streep. I mean, she's just. I'm thinking of the new actors coming out with the younger ones, and I can't really even. Like a lot of these folks did start when they were in their 20s and 30s, and I really can't.
I think Bradley Cooper is not a bad actor. I think he's really good. Bradley Cooper, Amy Adams, Amy Adams. I think she's really good. I think, as well. Jennifer Lawrence won for Silver Linings Playbook a couple of years ago, which I thought was really good. And some people didn't think it was really worth them an Oscar. I thought her performance was brilliant because what she did in that movie, she took that role another way. She was proactive, as opposed to being reactive. Usually somebody who suffered from mental illness, all these, it would have been like, oh, woe, it's me. Not making light of mental illness, but I'm just saying that, she would have been more, seen herself as a victim. She got much more proactive and took it, and she was much more, I thought, went on the offensive, and I think she took that role in a very, very, I was very impressed how she did that role, and I think that's why I was not surprised she won the Oscar for it, because I thought the way she, put a new spin on that role was very, very impressive to me. And that's Jennifer Lawrence, as well. But I think, Amy Adams, I think she's an up-and-coming one. Lupita Nyong'o, 12 Years a Slave. I think she's a very good actress. I mean, she's got a couple of films coming out herself. So I think there's some young actors and generations. And Adrian Brody's still young. I mean, so I think they're definitely there. And I think they're, and I think that you have to watch. I think James Franco. He's late 30s or early 40s now, but I think he's a very good versatile actor. I think he's very, very good. So I think they're definitely out there, but you have to kind of really keep up and hunt for them as well. But I think they're definitely very out there. I would think so.
I wonder if you'd comment about Pixar-type movies. And do you think that they will ever become mainline industry for awards such as these? Or will it always be a specialty because it has nobody live?
Good question. I'd say probably in the next I think anything's possible. I think as time progresses, I think people the audiences who tend to watch those type of films, I would say 20 to 25 years from now, that could easily very well be a Best Picture nominee. Babe was nominated in 1995 for Best Picture. It didn't win, but it was about the pigs.
The character Mater, the tow truck in Cars, right, was a marvelous character.
True. But
and he was created, but he was not recognized by anything.
Good point. But I would say in the future, I think you'll see probably as time changes, I think films, like I said, look at the Academy Awards even over the past decade. Look at the type of film, certain decades, certain films get nominated. And I'd also say the Academy Awards has a lot to do with politics and sentiment. It's like a lot of politics takes place there. It was kind of interesting. The late Bob Hope said one time when he always used to be the one of the master ceremonies for the he said multiples sometimes to fill out the telecast. And he came out that night. He goes, "This is the night when Hollywood puts aside its petty jealousies and brings out its major jealousies." So I mean, so a lot of times, like I said, with the Academy Awards, it's just a lot of it's like, politics, the dude's paying who's back in your movie. I owe this person a favor, or he or she's, done this, she's made millions for the studio over this year. She hasn't been nominated yet, or, this is a newcomer. We want to make her career, we want to give him a jump start. So it's just a lot of factors, to determine who. I mean, I think those things come into play by why some people win Oscar early in their career or later in their career or some point in their career. It's just a lot of, it's the politics. And also the sentiment of the country, I think, has a lot to do with it, too. That's why I really, as much as I like them, I don't think anybody should just really take them seriously in a sense. Not to the point where, people just, it was an honor to win the award, but they just, again, there are a lot of factors that determine why somebody does win an Academy Award. I mean, and I think it's just, like I said, just showcases sheer popularity. Like I said, also just, or you're a veteran, some Academy Awards, it's clear, like some years, are just, it's clear, like 1992, it was clear that it was Veterans Day for the Academy Awards. All the older actors won. I mean, and that was just, now, except with the exception of Marisa Tomei. She went for My Cousin Vinny. But every other category, were pretty much, the veterans. And that was considered, a fluke, and there was some, considered that, and people said she didn't win. Jack Palance, accidentally gave her a wrong name. No, she won. The fact is, because if she'd not won there, the accountants are at the end of the stage. The accountants would come up and say, that was a mistake. The person who won the Academy Award was this, but people just could not wrap themselves around the fact that a woman who won for a performance of My Cousin Vinny, which was a good performance, but somehow because she beat out a number of other actors, like, who were in, prominent, Vanessa Redgrave and some other character that year as well, but, that was always a myth, urban legend, that she really didn't win. I was like, well, no, the Academy would not let their integrity, or the accountants would not allow their integrity to be sullied by them. So you have those type of dynamics as well. Go ahead.
One of our best female actresses, Annette Bening, she was nominated twice, and she got beaten both times by an actress, Hilary Swank, right, who, doesn't have anywhere near the career, but the timing for Annette Bening being in those 2 years was probably unfortunate for her.
Exactly. I mean, the time. If you look at again, it's like who you're nominated against. I mean, I think if you're in the category of Meryl Streep, no, she's only won 3 Oscars herself. She's been nominated 17 times, Meryl Streep, but she's only won 3 Oscars. So I think a lot of it has to do with who you're up against. Nominated, like I said, 2004 that time, 2005, Heath Ledger, the year that. Philip Seymour Hoffman for Capote. I think in any other year, any of those guys would have won the Best Actor. Whether it was Heath Ledger or Terrence Howard, David Strathairn, or Joaquin Phoenix, because all those performances that year were just dynamite, and every one of them were like under 40 years old, except for Strathairn, and he was only in his early to mid 40s. So I mean, I think any other year those guys would have won Best Actor, but it was just the competition that year was so strong, and I think and also in 1986, Paul Newman won for The Color of Money. The competition that year was not necessarily the best, but that was also a makeup Oscar, probably for all the other times he should have won. For The Verdict and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and and The Sting and stuff like that. So I mean, so again, it goes back to those those politics that take place within the awards and within themselves. Yeah, Hilary Swank is a very good actress. I mean, she's a great actress. But again, as I said, it's a good example of some people who are win Oscars and things, but necessarily still reach a certain level.
Since you teach women's studies also, what if you had a daughter or a granddaughter who you would like to present a good role model for, which movies would you take her to see?
Wizard of Oz.
Perhaps. The Miracle Worker with Anne Bancroft. I think see that one. I think that probably Clara's Heart or Whoopi Goldberg.
What? Clara's
Heart, Whoopi Goldberg. Mona Lisa Smile with Julia Roberts. I think those would be some. Those would probably be some of the main 3 I'd probably take her to go see. And Maggie Smith, the prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
I would just like to compliment you on your amazing memory.
Thank you.
You not only list the year in which it won, but the competitors and the actors. It's been a pleasure to watch. Any year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elwood.
Thank you.
We have a small token of our appreciation.
Well, thank you very much.
everybody enjoyed the program.
Thank you.
Let's give it-
Thank you very much. Thank you.